Welcome to today's Explainer. We usually think of history as this single, straightforward timeline, right? Kind of like a straight road leading right from the past to where we are today. But honestly, the truth is that the legacy of any given moment depends entirely on where you happen to be standing on the map. Today, we're going to explore how one single year, 1864, left vastly different footprints on opposite sides of the globe.
So I want you to consider a question for a moment. How do we remember the year 1864? How does history get memorialized across completely different continents and cultures? Well, as we're about to see, the exact same calendar year can represent the celebrated birth of a modern institution in one hemisphere and a deeply tragic, sobering climax of colonial conflict in another. Part 1. The 1864 Rooftop Bar. Let's kick things off in the present day, high above the bustling, energetic streets of Oxford Street in London. Picture this. You step away from the busy, chaotic retail floors, take an elevator up, and walk out into an absolute urban oasis. Perched right on the 6th floor of the John Lewis flagship store, the newly unveiled 1864 Rooftop Bar and Kitchen offers this chic, greenhouse-style retreat. It covers over 7,000 square feet, it was meticulously designed with benugo to hold up to 200 guests, and it's just brimming with wildflowers and plush seating. It offers truly panoramic views of the entire city skyline. It's basically the perfect, peaceful escape from the frenetic retail world churning away just below. And the menu is pretty fascinating too, because it intentionally blends modern luxury with botanical freshness to celebrate the store's deep heritage. You're not just getting standard fare here. You've got incredibly crafted dishes like lobster rolls with a rich Marie Rose sauce, seaweed tempura monkfish, or for dessert, a decadent vegan chocolate mousse. Even the drinks tie into the theme. They've got cocktails infused with fresh herbs grown right there on the rooftop, like their signature Fig Old Fashioned. It's a space that's specifically designed to commemorate the year this iconic brand was born, merging top-tier modern hospitality with a really rich historic legacy. Part 2. Birth of a Retail Empire. To truly understand the name of this bar, we have to travel back to May 1st, 1864.
That was the exact day a young, highly ambitious Somerset draper named John Lewis opened a tiny, tightly packed shop at 132 Oxford Street. He definitely didn't know it yet, but he was planting the seeds for a British retail cornerstone. And he started really small. Actually, he famously resorted to scraping the plaster off the interior walls of his shop just to get a few extra inches of space for his stock. Fast forward to 1906, and the success was undeniable. Get this, he walked into a struggling store in Chelsea called Peter Jones with 20,000-pound notes literally stuffed in his pocket and just bought it outright. But the real game changer for the company came from his son, Spaden Lewis. While recovering from a severe riding accident in 1909, Spaden had an epiphany. He realized his own personal salary was actually more than all of his employees earned combined. He felt this was fundamentally unfair. So in 1914, in a wildly bold move, he introduced a radical profit-sharing model. And the crazy part, he did it without even telling his dad. He actually sold his own house just to fund the initiative. He shortened the working day, set up staff committees, and the result was just staggering. In 5 short years, Spaden turned an 8,000-pound deficit into a $20,000 profit.
So the big takeaway here is that this genuine commitment to value and employee partnership cemented a beloved British institution that is still thriving today. This ethos grew a compulsively neat little drapery into a massive 4 billion pound empire, where workers are still proudly known as partners rather than employees. When you raise a glass at the 1864 Rooftop Bar today, that incredible story of progressive business is exactly what you're toasting. Part 3. A Tale of Two Lewises. Because while John Lewis the Draper was making history in London in 1864, on the exact opposite side of the world, another man named John Lewis was making a very different kind of history.
It's a completely jarring historical coincidence. On one side of the world, in 1864 London, a draper is laying the luxurious foundation for a retail empire. But on the exact opposite side of the world, in 1864 Western Australia, a shepherd who also happened to be named John Lewis was stationed on the harsh, unforgiving frontier at Cockatoo Spring. In the exact same year, entirely separate and profoundly different legacies were unfolding.
Part 4. The Butterabby Graves Conflict. We're now going to pivot to official State Heritage Office records documenting a tragic period of colonial conflict at a place known as Butterabby Graves. Looking at the official assessment documentation from the Heritage Council of Western Australia, we see a stark shift in our story. As we explore these records, we're moving far away from luxury retail and diving into the impartial, meticulous documentation of colonial law enforcement, rapid pastoral expansion, and indigenous resistance.
Now, the historical context here is absolutely vital. Try to imagine the desperation unfolding during this era. In the late 1840s and 1850s, the Avon Valley had become severely overstocked, which prompted the colonial government to allow pastoralists to lease vast tracts of B-class land much further north and east. As these foreign pastoralists pushed into these new territories, they didn't just take the land, they took over the most critical resource for human survival in that environment: water. The local Aboriginal groups, including the displaced Nahanagardhi, Wulunyu, and Wajeri peoples, fiercely resisted this occupation of their traditional ancestral territories. Tensions escalated rapidly as water access dwindled, and the daily abuses by shepherds grew increasingly unbearable.
The official documents impartially outline a deeply tragic sequence of events. It all started in February of 1864, when that other John Lewis, the shepherd, was speared in direct retaliation for shooting an Aboriginal man's dog. Then, in August, a ticket of leave man, essentially a paroled convict named Thomas Bott, was attacked near his hut at Butterabby. A month later, in September, a pastoralist named James Rudd was killed at his hut after carelessly leaving his gun unattended. The deaths of Lewis, Bott, and Rudd triggered a massive police response from colonial authorities, which ultimately led to the capture, trial, and execution of 5 Aboriginal men in January of 1865.
The Heritage Council's records detail exactly how fear and displacement fueled this devastating cycle of violence on both sides. Shepherds often left their flocks unattended or committed terrible abuses, which inevitably sparked retaliations. Official records note that the Aboriginal people became completely resolute about repelling the invaders who were monopolizing their vital water sources. Any perceived threat was met with immediate violence from the shepherds, creating this inescapable, deadly loop of conflict.
The colonial response was swift and, honestly, highly calculated. Listen to this quote directly from resident magistrate L.J. Bailey, who oversaw the inquests. He wrote to the colonial secretary recommending that the captured men be executed on the exact spot where the crimes were committed. This clearly reveals the colonial government's deliberate, systematic policy of using highly visible, localized executions to instill fear and forcefully deter any further Aboriginal resistance.
After a trial in the Supreme Court in Perth, 5 men, Wangyakaku, Yamrakara, Garter, Sharlakara, and Wiliakara, were convicted. They were placed on a ship back to the region, and then marched in a grim, heavily guarded procession all the way back to Butterabby. There, in the dead of night on January 28, 1865, they were executed before a gathered crowd of Aboriginal witnesses who had been rounded up by constables. After they were officially declared dead, the 5 men were buried in shallow graves right there on the site.
Part 5. A legacy set in stone. Let's look at what remains today.
According to the official assessment, this site is incredibly rare. It's an undisturbed archaeological location where a government execution of 5 men was conducted together at one time. While some marker stones were temporarily moved in the 1970s for farming purposes, the graves themselves remain completely undisturbed, providing a permanent, irreplaceable historical anchor to the violence of the 1860s.
Today, Butterabby Graves stands as a place of immense social value to multiple groups. It's highly valued by the Aboriginal communities of the Murchison region, who actively preserve the memory of the 5 men through continuing oral traditions. It's also valued by the European community of Mulewa, which you can see by the respectful placement of a memorial stone in 1973 and a shelter shed built in 2001. It's a site that preserves a deeply painful but absolutely necessary chapter of history. It forever reminds us of the immense human cost of displacement and expansion. So, I'll leave you with this final thought. When we look back at the year 1864, we see 2 entirely different worlds. As we celebrate one enduring legacy with high-end dining and botanical cocktails in the London sky, we've also got to consciously remember the sobering, tragic realities etched into the Australian earth during that exact same year. How we choose to remember, preserve, and ultimately learn from both of these 1864 legacies is entirely up to us. Thank you for joining us for this explainer, and keep questioning the history around you.